Now, Ms. Fraser-Butlin, our next witness is Mr. I, is it?
That's correct.
Well, let me remind those of you who've been here this week and tell you, those of you who haven't as yet, the inquiry takes seriously the difficulty which many people have in talking to the world about experiences which are often deeply personal. And it is important for us to get the best evidence which they can give. That often may involve ensuring that when they give evidence, they don't have the sense that they're speaking to people outside the room in a way which is visible. That applies to the next two witnesses. The first, Mr. I, today, whose evidence will not be live streamed visually, so nobody will see his face. It will be live streamed on audio feed so that anyone who wishes can see what is being said by him to you. You will have the benefit of both seeing and hearing what he has said. He is happy with that. But what it means is that I have to make sure that nobody publishes or anything which might lead to his identification, because he wishes to be known as Mr. I, and nobody publishes anything which might show his image. And for that purpose, I have made a legal order, a breach of which is treated as a contempt of court, and so a breach of which is really quite serious. Let me just read it out to you, because that's what I have to do. The press are already aware of its exact terms. It is ordered that the name and address of witness W1383, to you and I, that's Mr. I, and any other identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness 1383 must be referred to only as Mr. I. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. Mr. I.
Your full name is known to the inquiry, but today you'll be known as Mr. I. Please repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. I, you have severe haemophilia A.
Yes, that's right.
And you were first diagnosed as a very young child.
Correct.
In fact, you had your first bleed when you were just 6 weeks old.
Yes, that's correct.
And you initially received cryoprecipitate.
No, not initially. Within Northern Ireland, I've always had factor products. The only time I ever received cryoprecipitate was in England whenever we were on a family holiday. I was later in life than that. Apologies.
No, that's fine. Your parents have recalled that it was in the early 80s that the treatment was changed over to factor concentrate.
Okay.
And your mum recalled being told you were being given heat-treated products, and when they weren't available, you were being given Scottish products.
Yes, that's correct.
Have you talked to your mum about this?
Yes, I have. We're not long after a conversation around it, and if there may be a mix-up, but it was definitely factor productitis.
But in relation to the question that you were being given heat-treated products or Scottish products,
yep.
Can you tell us what your mum's understanding was about what was going on?
Mum herself had been diagnosed with hepatitis non-A, non-B after a successful tonsillectomy. She got very ill after the procedure, and so was aware of the dangers with American Factor 8. At a young age, she had talked to the treating consultant at the time, and they had assured her that I would be on either National Health derived products or heat treated products, and so she put the faith in that that would be what I would be given.
And do you know what your parents' understanding of was why that was?
Not so much why it was, more so just because of what had happened to Mum in the past with her experience of the American products.
You've said in your statement you understand that in around 1983-84 they were trying out heat-tested products, and when they didn't use these, they were trying to use Scottish products on children, which my parents say they were told were as pure as possible.
Yes, that's correct.
Was that your understanding of what you were being told?
Yes.
And again, that your mum recalls she was told by Dr. Dempsey that you'd never be given American products, you'd only be given Scottish or heat-treated Factor 8.
That's what she was led to believe.
So you'd receive the purest product possible.
Yep, that's right.
Could we have document 1383006, please? And the main paragraph. This is a letter in 1995 where it seems that you were a particularly high user of Factor 8.
Okay.
And it says at the start, I've been having fun and games trying to procure supplies of Factor 8 from Scotland. It appears there's some difficulty in meeting demands by production. Therefore, I've been looking at the usage during the past few months for all the patients. And your treating doctor is asked to give an indication of whether there's anything special or peculiar going on with you. Were you aware of any of these difficulties in relation to Scottish Factor?
No, not.
Your parents' understanding is that you were given infected blood products sometime between 1982 and 1984,
Okay.
which is when they were first told you had contracted hepatitis.
Yep.
When your parents were told you'd contracted hepatitis, you were about 2 or 3 years old.
Yes, that's.
And what were they told?
I'm not totally au fait with the conversation, just sort of going on experience that, yes, I had it. It was obviously a concern. Nobody really knew what the next stage was going to be, whether it would develop, whether it was going to be any further than that, but that's they were told I had it, and that was about the height of it, I think.
You've said in your statement that she doesn't recall being given any information about what the infection meant for you.
No.
And she remembers being told that all haemophiliacs had hepatitis C.
Yep, that's right.
And she shouldn't be concerned about it, as you would live a long and happy life.
Yep.
Is that your recollection?
That's my recollection.
Or your understanding of what your mum was?
My understanding of what it was, yes.
Then when you were about 6 or 7, your parents were called back into the hospital. And what were they told about your hepatitis?
I wasn't 100% sure it was at that age, but that I had cleared the virus, or I had cleared the virus naturally. That I think was from. And then whenever they went and had a conversation with my paediatric consultant, Dr. Dempsey, he was furious that they'd been told that, and it was actually very insulted and said that, this virus, nobody has proved that this virus goes away. This virus has a potential to hide and may be undetectable in tests, and that not to consider that I had cleared it. I think then going forward after that, I was tested very regularly into my mid to late teens, and that a decision was made somewhere along then that, yes, it has been undetectable for a number of years, and that I had cleared the virus.
You requested a copy of your medical records in autumn 2018 to
Yes.
try and understand and confirm that chronology.
That's correct.
Because, as you said, you were working off your mum and your parents' memories. What, in terms of documentation, have you been able to obtain?
The medical records that I've made available, going through them myself, I've found very limited detail on why, where, or when I did contract the virus. A very similar amount of detail for why, where, when the virus became non-detectable, and any conversations that was had around that.
The details of your treatment in the 80s is simply missing at this stage?
Yes, that's correct.
You were always treated at the same hospital?
Yes, bar a few occasions, maybe whenever we were on a family holiday or such like.
But the bulk of your haemophilia records would be with?
Would be with the Royal Victoria Hospital at the time.
And you said that you've had a recent conversation with Dr. Benson about records.
Yes, that's correct.
What was that conversation?
He's made it quite clear that a lot of this information, obviously there was, they changed hospitals in the late 90s, early 2000s over to the city. There may have been documentation that got lost in the move, and that they are still turning up details here, there, and you know, there's more details that may come up going forward, but they obviously can't make any promises in that. It was long before his time.
But at this stage, you don't have those early records?
No, I do not.
As far as you're aware, you've not contracted any other infections, but you're worried about it?
That's correct. On every correspondence you may see between my consultant and any other consultant, the first paragraph nearly always sets out that I am a public health risk due to the potential of contraction of VCJD. That's something you have to try and live with at the same time, you know, and it's maybe not the nicest thing to see in your opening paragraph of an email or a letter about you, you know.
And you've received the correspondence indicating that because you had factor concentrates between 1980 and 2001,
yep, you
shouldn't donate blood, organs or semen?
That's correct.
And you should inform all healthcare professionals?
That's correct.
And that concerns you?
It's something you have to live with. It's something, you know, the potential is that nothing will come of it, but there's always that doubt in the back of your mind, or should you start feeling unwell, or should, you know, is this something new, is this something that's coming? You know, there's the stigma of having had hepatitis C in the past, the conversations that were passed over to my parents at the time, you know, that this virus doesn't go away, it may hide, it may do this. You know, it's something to live with.
You said that you were tested throughout your teens and early 20s,
yes,
in relation to the hepatitis C, and you're concerned that you may have been used for research purposes.
Yep.
Why do you think that may have been?
Probably because I supposedly cleared the virus naturally. I would imagine that there was tests done to find out how I'd done it. I don't think it was a common occurrence that the virus just did go away. So I imagine there was research done to find out why. If it was for the greater good, that's fair enough by me. You know, I have no issue with it at all. I just do recall a number of years in my sort of mid-teens that there was more blood taken than just your regular tests.
As you've said, your hepatitis C was cleared naturally without any treatment.
Yep.
Could we have document 1383004? And the first paragraph of that letter, please. It's a letter from 1995 dealing with the point that you are anti-HCV positive but have normal serum ALTs but are not positive pCRNA. It's the medical terminology for saying you've cleared the hepatitis C. The next sentence is what I wanted to draw your attention to. No one is entirely certain as to the future for such patients, but clearly they do not require alpha interferon.
Yep.
And you haven't had treatment,
no.
But your understanding is that the future is somewhat unclear for you.
That's right. I think, hopefully, it's clear that the virus has gone. I have seen other documents and have seen, you know, correspondence that says that it has.
Could we stop the?
Oh.
There's a 3-minute delay, so we should be fine.
We'll just remove your name.
Just thank you. It had to be me.
I can take a moment. I'll just go and ask whether we can start. Oh, thank you, Tim. What I'll do, Mr. I, is the tape will, I think, restart now, and I will ask you the same question, so that we should pick up where we were.
Okay.
Okay? we were looking at the document on the screen, and I asked you, your understanding is that the future is somewhat unclear for you.
Correct. Again, it's something that you have to deal with, but hopefully that the future is clear enough that there's going to be no repercussions. I've seen myself referred to a patient who has occasional elevated ALTs, but is hepatitis C negative, I believe is the descriptor, the medical description that would be in some correspondence.
But you have described being quite unwell because of the hepatitis C, or at least because what you think is because of the hepatitis C.
Potentially.
Since you were young.
Yes.
Can you tell us what the physical symptoms have been?
Well, I've always had issues with my stomach, mild irritable bowel syndrome, mild reflux, would feel more fatigued than peers of my own age or sometimes people that I work with. It may just be me, or it may be down to the virus. Again, that's questions that sort of go unanswered. Nobody can really seem to be able to give you an answer to it. I've asked on occasion, have they been related? And the best guess is possibly.
You've described in your statement that the lack of get up and go has had a big impact on your friendships and as you care for your son.
Maybe obviously not as much as other people have been affected that sat in this seat. But there's an issue, there definitely is an underlying issue of some description that I don't have the same energy maybe as peers my age, and it is noticeable at times, and it seems to come and go in waves.
You've also struggled mentally. What can you tell us about that?
Again, I think a lot of that maybe relates to the nobody knows going forward. So I would probably describe myself at times as a bit of a hypochondriac. You start feeling sick about something, or something starts going wrong, and you think, is this in relation to something? Is there something more coming? Generally, it may turn out to be a flu, it may turn out to be whatever, but there's always that underlying doubt.
You've said in your statement that not knowing the extent of the infection and the potential long-lasting effects is very daunting.
Yeah.
And it's made you very paranoid and anxious about your health.
It can do, yes, that's correct.
Have you ever been offered any counselling or therapeutic support in relation to the hepatitis C?
No, not until this inquiry started. And then
now, you've said already your mum is also a haemophiliac.
That's correct, yes.
And I'm going to ask you a few questions about her.
Okay.
Because I know you've already talked to her about a lot of her story as well. She has mild haemophilia A.
That's correct.
And as you said, she was also infected with hepatitis C, which she believes was from treatment before and after a tonsillectomy in April 1980.
Correct.
She developed jaundice very shortly after that and was very unwell for about 6 months.
Yeah.
She recalls a conversation between the doctors at the time. Do you know anything about that?
I know she had a conversation with the surgeon prior to her tonsillectomy, which she did not have with a haematologist. The surgeon asked her if she was sure that she wanted to go ahead with the procedure due to the unknown of the product she was going to be given. She hadn't been fully aware of the risk, but was content that she needed to have the tonsillectomy, so carried on with the procedure. She then went on to develop jaundice, feel very unwell, and was sent home, I think, quite shortly after her treatment, or her procedure, and they tested her regularly. I think maybe the district nurse came out and took blood tests and such like off her. But I do note in one conversation with her, she mentioned that at one stage the nurse missed the vein, and she started bleeding from the puncture wound, and the district nurse actually dropped the syringe and stepped back. So they knew themselves that there was more to it than just hepatitis or an illness. In her mind, that is anyway. And she was diagnosed with hepatitis non-A, non-B as it was known then.
And your mum recalls a conversation at her bedside just before she was discharged from the hospital, where one of the doctors said maybe she's got, at which point he wrote something on a piece of paper or on his hand and showed it to his colleagues, and the one who appeared to be in charge said, it's just the junk we've been pumping into her, she's fit to go home.
Yes, I remember hearing that.
And she's always wondered what that conversation was really about.
Yeah.
When in around 1984, your mum wanted to know about hepatitis C
Yep.
and whether she was infected. Can you tell us how she came to find out about her diagnosis?
I think that the media were starting to pick up on some reports of this virus that was hitting haemophiliacs and people who had been treated with blood products. She then took action herself and went to see her GP. On going to ask the GP, he says, "What the hell do you want a hepatitis C test for? You have no chance of getting it." So she said that she felt she had, and he said, "Okay, I'll refer you." My knowledge then was that she was contacted by in the hospital and brought in, and somehow the information had get fed to her that she wanted a test for this, in which she was then told she had it, and that was how she found out that she'd had hepatitis C.
But it was quite striking for your mum, wasn't it, that when she went to the GP to ask about it, the GP laughed at her when she was requesting the test.
That's right.
And when she was told she had hepatitis C, she was also told she'll probably have a long and normal life, and it was just a risk of having factor VIII.
That's right.
Your mum has been unwell for a number of years. What have her symptoms been?
Similar, she would fatigue a lot easier than others. She would have maybe bouts of times where she would feel flu-like symptoms, just not feel generally unwell. I believe that a lot of it's been a direct effect from having and carrying hepatitis C for the length of time. It definitely has had a negative impact on her health, and whatever going forward, I don't know.
She has had significant lethargy.
Yes.
And she used to think she was just being lazy.
That's right.
She's also had a lot of stomach and gastric problems.
Right.
And she suffered from depression and had significant difficulty sleeping.
Yes.
How did that affect you and the rest of the family?
It's always a stress and always a worry. I knew from a child basically about the haemophilia, hepatitis, how it was all related, and pretty much how it went hand in hand almost. So whenever you go into your teens and your later teens, and you start to realise, the actual severity and the implications of these viruses and what they can do. My parents were involved with the local group in the Haemophilia Society at the time whenever I was young, and a lot of the people you met, older men who had haemophilia, most of them were very seriously ill, and it wasn't the haemophilia, it was viruses, should it have been Hep C, HIV, and it was something you learn to develop and grow up with, so it's something that you're never really scared of, but you're very aware. So I suppose going into my later teens and having seen that in my younger days, that all of these men and a lot of them have passed away actually. It's stressful. You always wonder, is there going to be something? Is this going to happen to my mum? Is she going to get worse? Is she going to develop more illness? So there's an underlying worry there. Then yes, of course, and that spreads to the wider family as well. And the father would be affected as well, I'm sure.
And very practically, it meant that your mum couldn't work full time.
Yeah.
And so she did a number of part-time jobs around what she could do and around childcare.
That's right, yeah.
And so financially, it impacted the family as well.
Oh, of course it did, yes.
Your mum only recently underwent treatment for the hepatitis C.
Yeah.
Do you know why she resisted it for so long?
I think there'd always been an underlying worry about what potentially could come from the interferon treatment. Again, with their involvement in the Haemophilia Society and such like, they knew people who had went through it. They seen the side effects, they seen how it could affect you in general, and I don't think she just didn't want to put herself through that. The treatment she received recently was promised it would be a very simple treatment. There's very limited side effects. I must admit, I pushed her myself to try to guide her to take it. I'd been assured that the treatment was a lot better and it wouldn't have any negative impact on her other than hopefully clear the virus and reduce her chance of liver issues going forward.
Your mum's described it in her statement that over the years, my haematologist, Dr. Benson, has offered me an array of treatment to help clear my hepatitis C virus.
That's right.
I've always shied away from treatment, probably having a silly mindset that if I tampered with the virus, it may just turn nasty towards me.
Yeah.
I suppose I've lived with the infection in my body for so long, it's become part of who I am. After avoiding treatment for many years, I was told that I'd eventually need it, and so she did start the treatment.
That's right, yeah.
How is your mum now, post-treatment?
Well, she has been through her treatment and has been told that the virus is non-detectable. Again, another concern, does that mean it's cleared or it's just non-detectable and it may come back? As far as how she feels, I think she's actually felt possibly worse since taking the treatment and from after the treatment. As far as aches, pains, feeling lethargic and such like goes, she doesn't feel great.
Your mum had a particularly terrible, what she's described as a terrible experience of stigma associated with hepatitis C.
Yep.
When she went in to be treated for a serious abscess, and she was at the School of Dentistry.
Yep.
Do you know anything about that?
I just remember coming out and being disgusted with the setup, that she was left to the very last. There was going to be no water procedures after it. That I think everything was covered up. There was surgical bags over everything to make sure that everything was kept uncontaminated. And whenever she recovered or woke up in the recovery, they were basically scrubbing the place around her. It was, and they hadn't moved her into a recovery ward. Just the general feeling, as a lot of people sitting in this seat have said, there's a distinct notion that you're unclean, and that is the main stigma.
She recalls that when she was wheeled into theatre, 2 nurses came forward. One of them grabbed her left arm and looked at it. She said to her colleague, "Look, is that a needle stick mark?" while looking at the mark from my blood test. They were very abrasive, and I couldn't understand why. And then when she came to, the nurses were cleaning down all of the equipment, and one of them said, "This is all for you," gruffly. And it was only then that it dawned on her that they probably knew of her hepatitis C status and thought that she was a drug addict.
Yeah, and I think that is the stigma that's attached to a lot of it, that you didn't get it. we were given this, we didn't get it through any foul play or action of our own. It was nothing that we wanted or put at risk that we put ourselves through to get. I think that has to be very clear that there's a stigma. I think if I said in some of my own statements, but prior to the mid to the early 80s, if you told anybody you had haemophilia, they would have said, "What's that?" Afterwards, you told somebody you had haemophilia, and the feeling you always got was they may have took a step back and says, "Oh, have you got HIV or have you got hepatitis?" I think that's a critical point that needs to be sort of put across, that for what was quite an unknown disease, a bleeder's disease, it got a lot of attention in the 80s, 90s, and it was all for the wrong reasons.
Moving back to you, you've received money from the Skipton Fund and continue to receive money from the Northern Ireland Blood Payment Scheme.
That's correct.
How have you found dealing with that new scheme?
The new scheme, not so good. Previously, it was within it was different trusts, so it would have been Caxton I would have dealt with in the past, and prior to the regular payments and such like starting, I very rarely ever contacted them. Again, you always feel if you have to contact, if you have to ask, you're begging for help, and that's a notion that you don't like feeling like that either. But however, with Caxton, I went through a bit of a break-up. I found myself on the lower end of having a good bank balance, and I did ask for some help. They were very helpful. There was no issue whatsoever. The same can't be said for the BSO. Now, I'm not going to criticise the person that you deal with. Very, very pleasant interaction with them. But, and I could show the form. The initial form, I used to have a mobility car, so here's the background of it. And then the benefit changes, I lost it under moving on to PIP. So I found myself again in a situation where I was going to have to outlay a significant amount of money to keep myself on the road, and I went to them and asked for help. On the initial form, it says that these one-off grants are to help people with mobility issues, with this, with that. And whenever I went through everything, went through the whole process of filling in your bank details, your incomings, your outgoings, which feels very intrusive as well, I got a letter back saying that this has to go to the Health Trust for discussion, and you should know within the next few days. My return came back was that no, they felt that I was not eligible for any aid because my earnings were too high, and that I didn't fit that criteria, and that these benefits were not, or this was not to cover mobility, even though it clearly says in their form to start with. But that stage, I replied, I thanked them for their time and says, look, that's fine. I disagree with your decision, but I'm not going to play it any further. So that has been my experience with the BSO, other than the regular payment side of things, and I won't personally be going back and asking for any more.
It wasn't just intrusive, it was also illogical from your perspective.
And derogatory nearly. You know, it made you feel like you're begging for help. You know, these things are supposed to be there for people affected, and whenever you have to go and ask for it and be told no, you sort of wonder to yourself, well, what's the point in it? I also find them to be very, I think if you're pushier with them, I think if you have the backbone to stand up to them, or maybe just not feel as if you're begging and be quite willing to shout and scream, you will get more. So it's a very unfair process.
And that's why you think that your mum hasn't received as much
That's right, yeah.
financial assistance as you,
That's
because
right.
she's been much shyer about asking.
Correct.
You've said in your statement that you don't feel that financial assistance should be means tested. Why is that?
Why should it be? That's more the question. Whether you work, whether you don't work. So I'm quite lucky with the role I'm in. My employer is very, very understanding. I can take time. I can work from home. I can, have flexible working hours. Should I feel? I have a sick benefit scheme. So if I need to take time off, I know I'm not going to have loss of earnings and such like. There are others who may not be in that position and can't get themselves in that position and can't work, but that's not my fault. That I have been lucky enough that I can work. I think we were all afflicted with the same infections, viruses. So why should we be treated any differently? And I think that's very important. And a point that was made by the last person in the seat too, the devolution of power in Northern Ireland should make no difference whatsoever. The fact that our politicians can't get on with each other doesn't mean that we should be treated any different.
You've also had difficulty obtaining life insurance.
That's right, yes.
And what have you been told?
I can't get it, and that's the long and the short of it. I've tried in the past. Whenever I started buying my house, I was told then I couldn't get it. And more recently, I took up a will writing service through work, and obviously they advise you on what you should be doing to protect yourself financially and protect your family going forward, and should anything happen. And their main piece of advice is life insurance. The guy came back to me about 20 minutes later and says, I have tried everyone, he says, that provides us cover. He says, I'm sorry, none of them will touch you.
Those are the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to say at this stage?
No, I would like to thank the inquiry again, as everyone else has, for coming around and doing their tour of the country. I actually have personally felt it a bit liberating. Had this conversation with my mum last night, that I found it a lot easier to tell people, and to tell people even in work. I would always have kept it very close, kept it very personal, even the fact that I had haemophilia due to the stigma related with it. And over the last year, maybe since this has come on, I've quite openly told colleagues and more people than just my direct management that, what afflictions I've had, and I have found it easier. So thank you, and thank you.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Snowden if there's anything he would like me to
problem.
raise. There's nothing from him.
There's nothing from me except to thank you for your openness and for being prepared to be and being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll take a break now, shall we, till 1:45, and that's when we will hear, shall we, from Mrs. J.
Mrs. J, that's correct.